Now, Pavarotti was a good friend.
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti. Now I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. Now as a disclaimer, this channel is for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions. I'm not here to slander anyone. So let's get started. Folks, what I'm going to do over my next 3 videos is I am going to absolutely annihilate the fact that Bryan Kohberger should even be considered in this case. Because I'm going to provide cold, hard evidence of motive for the victims in this case, for all 3 of the victims in this case, over the next 3 videos. And I'm going to do it with information that you have never heard before, I assure you. Because it's the cumulative efforts of my investigation that has uncovered all of this. And in this video, we're going to start with one of the innocent victims in this case, and that is Xana. Now, as I have researched everything in this case, y'all are well aware that I have uncovered many things. You're not aware of the things that I'm about to describe in this video. Because I have mentioned many times when we start discussing the mother in this case, how that I believe that she was an informant. And she informed on the suspects that I have previously mentioned. And I still believe that wholeheartedly to this day. But I've also mentioned in previous videos that I don't believe that was her first time informing. You see, when somebody starts to work, especially with the feds as an informant, and I've showed you documentation on this in the past, that informant is held on to by the feds. They want continued use of their informants if possible. So with that in mind, and then going back to the last video that I put out, where my deep dive into all of the families in the case and where they had all lived at one point in Coeur d'Alene. And I mentioned that Coeur d'Alene was a key. And anytime that I find a key, I use it to try to unlock more doors in the case. Well, I've unlocked many doors with the Coeur d'Alene key. So in this episode, we are going to establish beyond a reasonable doubt, I believe, in one of the motives to the atrocity on King Road. And the mind-blowing part I think you're going to see is, even though this is completely new information and it will correlate perfectly to the case, it actually coincides with all of the information that I've put forward to this point. Because the new players I'm about to introduce you to, I'm also going to show you how those players associate themselves with the Aryan family. And how it makes the Aryan connection even more likely in this case. I'm sure you're ready to hear this information, and I'm not going to continue to hold it back from you. This is part 1, and in part 2 and part 3, I assure you, your minds will continually be blown. Let's get started. So we start once again right here where we've identified that the family members of the victims and possibly the victims themselves resided at some point in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Now, in this triangle, one thing I didn't really point out in the last video is this big red X that you see right in the almost center of the triangle. You see, all of these family members actually, where they lived, encompasses this red X. And this red X is very important because if you look closely, you'll see that Interstate 90 comes across that red X and continues west, but it goes south before it goes east. But then you'll also notice the other road that intersects it, and that's Highway 95. And it goes north to Canada, and it also goes south to Boise. You see, this intersection right here of this interstate and this highway is a very significant spot for all these family members to live within a couple of miles of, because there is a federal organization that designates certain areas of the country as high intensity DRUG trafficking areas. And you can see this one indicates the Northwest HIDTA. And when you look at Washington and Idaho right here, you'll see you have Highway 5 coming up into the Seattle-Tacoma area. And then I've said many times that narcotics are brought into Seattle and Tacoma, and then sometimes the ports are used to get the narcotics up to Alaska. But Interstate 90 is the main corridor to traffic the narcotics from Seattle and Tacoma to Spokane. And then from Spokane, they are then trafficked either east on Interstate 90 or right there in Coeur d'Alene where Highway 95 intersects Interstate 90. The narcotics can be taken north up to Canada that way, or they can be taken south all the way down to Boise. You can see Ada County right down here. But along that trek south, as we all know, is Moscow, Idaho. But either way, this intersection of Highway 95 and Interstate 90 is designated by the HIDTA as high intensity drug trafficking routes. Now we know that the Aryan family that was taken down, as you can see, in March of 2023, they trafficked narcotics into Washington State, Idaho, and all the way to Alaska. Now, how long did they have this area and this trafficking route organized? Well, you can see this operation was the culmination of a year and a half of great investigative work, said Richard Colati, special agent in charge of the FBI's Seattle field office. So if the investigation into them was a year and a half, we can assume that that's how long that they had been operating this particular organization, trafficking to Washington, Idaho, and to Alaska. But did they establish this? Or was it already established, and then when the last organization was taken down, they simply picked up where they left off? Because that's what happens with drug trafficking organizations. When one is taken out, another one simply steps in and continues the operations. So who was taken out a year and a half ago? We have these guys that called themselves the Fetty Bros. Now, the Fetty Bros was an interesting group because they consisted of very young, and you can say enterprising in the drug trafficking world, but very young and very enterprising drug traffickers. Now, the Fetty Bros, as you can see out of a news article from Spokane, and I'll just read this to you, but it says, today, the United States Attorney, Vanessa R. Waldrop, announced that the U.S. District Judge Thomas Rice has sentenced Hunter Bo O'Mealy, age 19, Caleb Ryan Carr, age 23, Matthew Gudinho Pena, age 21, for conspiracy to distribute 400 grams or more of FENT. All right, and we're going to skip some of this, but you'll see that they sentenced those three to 240 months and 196 months in the federal penitentiary. And according to documents and materials presented at the sentencing hearing, in the spring and summer of 2021, defendants O'Mealy, Carr, and Gudinho Pena, aka the Fetty Bros, they used Snapchat and other social media to locate a source of supply originated in Mexico. Defendants then traveled to Arizona and beyond to obtain deadly FENT pills in 10,000 pack quantities and poured those and other drugs into the Spokane community and across the United States, including in Washington, Arizona, Alaska, and Idaho. So they were taken down in the spring and summer of 2021, exactly a year and a half to the day that the Aryan family took over their organization and their trafficking. And notice Washington, Arizona, Alaska, and Idaho. Any similarities here? A year and a half culmination of investigative work, and they were trafficking to Washington, Idaho, and to Alaska. So when the Fetty Bros, who were, you could say, enterprising young men, they set up the trafficking route, bringing narcotics up from, you can see, Arizona. They initiated a source in Mexico, brought the drugs into Arizona, trafficked them all the way up to Seattle and Tacoma, and then from there to Spokane, and also all the way up into Alaska. They were taken down in 2021, and then the Aryan family simply picked up where they left off, trafficking to the exact same areas. Now, associates, this is how things went though for the Fetty Bros. Associates of 4 people arrested in the FENT ring tied to the deaths in Coeur d'Alene. Again, everything goes back to Coeur d'Alene. Investigators believe they were involved in a conspiracy to distribute 50,000 counterfeit pills, COC, METH, LSD, and Mary Jane. Now, what happened to these associates in Coeur d'Alene? Well, you can see the overdose death and homicide in northern Idaho. The DEA and the USPIS's joint investigation into the Fetty Bros drug organization stems from an overdose death and shooting in northern Idaho. So their entire investigation stems from these 2 deaths that happened in Coeur d'Alene. In May of 2021, Idaho State Police responded to a call regarding 15-year-old high school freshman in Coeur d'Alene who was unconscious in his bed. Notwithstanding extensive life-saving efforts, the young man was pronounced dead as a result of a FENT overdose. During an investigation into that overdose and based upon the review of the teenager's communications, DEA identified Matthew Holmberg as the likely supplier of the FENT pills that caused the young man's death. Not long after the overdose, Holmberg and his associate, Denon Fitterer Usher, were involved in the shooting death of another victim in Coeur d'Alene. This victim was found in a pool of blood in the middle of a road with multiple gunshot wounds. Text messages confirm that the victim had arranged to purchase counterfeit oxycodone pills laced with FENT from Kohberger. In fact, Fitterer Usher and Kohberger had traveled to this drug transaction together because the minor was a new customer. Both men were armed with a firearm. In their text message, Kohberger and Fitterer Usher stated they saw the life leave the victim's body and described their attempts to destroy evidence after the shooting. Ultimately, Fitterer Usher admitted they shot the victim inside their car during a drug deal gone bad. So, this is what happened in Coeur d'Alene, and you can see that the entire investigation into the Fetty Bros organization stemmed from these events that happened in Coeur d'Alene. So if it stemmed from these events in Coeur d'Alene, then we're going to have to pay close attention how they actually took down the Fetty Bros. Because if they're investigating from Coeur d'Alene out, you can bet that someone involved in this investigation is from Coeur d'Alene. So let's continue. Now, the Fetty Bros weren't playing around. You can see how many of these FENT pills that was confiscated upon their arrest, along with several of these ghost guns. And you can see in the image to the left all of the automatic firearms that they had amassed. As you can see, Gudinho, Pena, and O'Mealy target practicing here. And here is some of the ammunition that was confiscated along with more of those firearms. And you can see in the highlight here, it says several additional firearms were recovered during the execution of a search warrant of a high-end apartment complex located near the University of Arizona campus in Tucson, Arizona, where defendants were staying immediately prior to their arrest. So they lived in Arizona. They also had residences in Tacoma. Very interesting. And you know, during this short stint of their crime spree, they obviously amassed a considerable amount of, let's say, capital, all right, in the forms of narcotics, ammunition, and you can bet hard cash. So when they were arrested, I would have to assume that these youngsters were pretty well off financially. So they would have financial means to reach out beyond the jail to take care of business, if you might say. Now, they would take care of business for sure, even themselves. They would personally take care of business. As you can see here, the attempted murder of TM in Lakewood, Washington. Now, defendants' possession of illegal firearms in connection with the conspiracy culminated in the attempted unaliving of TM on September 25th, 2021. During that shooting, defendants expelled more than 40 rounds of ammunition at TM, striking him in the spine and paralyzing TM. And apparently they had a video of the shooting. Evidence establishing defendants' involvement in that attempted unaliving demonstrates they targeted TM because they falsely believed he was cooperating with law enforcement. So they went out and shot TM, whoever that associate is. They shot at him more than 40 times, hit him, paralyzed him, all because they falsely believed he was cooperating with law enforcement. So just from their perception that this guy was informing on them, they tried to unalive him. And that is my whole point in all of this. When you get into this type of situation, you don't necessarily have to be an informant for other people in the organization to believe that you are an informant. And if they do believe that you're an informant, they will take action. And you can see it says falsely, so that means the guy wasn't an informant, or else they would have put in here, he informed. So just from thinking he was an informant, they tried to unalive him. And he was not an informant. However, when another co-defendant was arrested with their DRUGS, defendants O'Mealy and Carr threatened to kill her. So I want you to pay close attention, because now we have to really pay close attention. Because it says when another co-defendant was arrested with theirs, defendant O'Mealy and Carr threatened to kill her. Now I showed you at the beginning the three individuals who were arrested and indicted. And it was all three males. It never listed a female in that article. So this co-defendant that was arrested along with them is obviously a female, and she obviously was not indicted with them. So that's important. Because as the articles continue to explain that investigators were able to get access to suspects' locations, cell phone data, photos, and videos of the suspects taking part in illegal activity with the help from a confidential source. Now, this one is not one that they thought was a confidential source. This is one that was one, and they didn't know it, who has ties to Spokane. Okay, now we're back to ties to Spokane. So where did this investigation originate? Coeur d'Alene. Coeur d'Alene and Spokane, pretty close to each other. As you can see here, where it lists the central cities and the state line there, here's Spokane, here's Coeur d'Alene. Now the confidential source told the DEA O'Mealy and Carr owned a business and sell designer clothes, DRUGS switches that make firearms fully automatic, and DRUGS out of a storage unit in Tacoma, records show. Documents say Carr and O'Mealy have a history of violence. O'Mealy pulled a gun on a confidential source, because they were short on money. And Carr was a suspect in a shooting in Seattle in the area in July of 2020. So O'Mealy pulled a gun on a confidential source because they were short on money. When another co-defendant was arrested with their DRUGS, defendants O'Mealy and Carr threatened to kill her. So they pulled a gun on the confidential informant that was a co-defendant, and it was a woman. According to the court documents, the confidential source recorded Snapchat videos where O'Mealy and Carr advertised DRUGS and toting guns. The source was able to help investigators link O'Mealy and Carr to Gudinho Pena. In October, documents Carr and O'Mealy reached out to the confidential source. Now, you can bet that Gudinho Pena, O'Mealy, and Carr have read all of these documents, and they now know without a doubt that they had a confidential source that took them down single-handedly, because they gave them every bit of information that led to their arrest. And they know this because they put it out in the open. They did everything but say the confidential source's name. But they can read this and they can know exactly who that confidential source is. And then you'll see on August 15, 2021, the confidential source provided the DEA with the Snapchat video showing Carr preparing to board an airplane with a small red bag. According to documents, the source said Carr was flying back to Tacoma with a half kilo of COC. So now it's telling you exactly when the confidential source gave them that information. On August 24th, documents say the confidential source did a controlled buy of narcotics with Carr and Belovich in the parking lot of a restaurant near downtown Spokane. Now, August 15th, August 24th, Spokane, we know that the confidential source is in the Spokane area. And who do we know that was arrested transporting narcotics from Spokane into Kootenai County? Well, it was this young lady. Now, when did she actually transport those narcotics into Kootenai County from Spokane? Well, it was August 12th, 2021 when she was arrested doing that. And then on August 15th is when the confidential source started providing information on these Fetty Bros. And on August 24th, the confidential force did a controlled buy. So it was a female that was a confidential source, likely from Coeur d'Alene, that was arrested as a co-defendant that began giving the information on the Fetty Bros. Now, it's been speculated by me due to these sealed federal records that the mother in this case not only was an informant on Mr. TF and Miss TR, but as I've stated in past videos, I believe that that wasn't her first time informing. I believe that on September 26th, she actually completed her snitch card and was released from being a federal informant. And look, all of her federal time turned to zero. Every one of her charges went away. What was she in possession of? A Schedule II with intent to deliver METH over 28 grams, less than 200. Oh, and also an FENT pill without a prescription, or multiple FENT pills without prescription. On August the 12th, again, just 3 days prior to when the confidential source began providing information on these guys. Now, is that the information that Miss Ann Taylor is very aware of as it relates to Miss Kernodle? Is that the reason that Steve G and his attorney Shannon Gray went through a lot of trouble in the beginning of the Kohberger case for them to have Ann Taylor removed from the case due to conflict of interest issues for the Kohberger case, because they knew of Miss Taylor's awareness of what Miss Kernodle had done in the past. Now, again, these Fetty Bros have shown what they will do to somebody they even thought was an informant that actually wasn't. 40 rounds of ammunition emptied at him. Now imagine what they would do to somebody that they know was an informant that sent them up the river. The next question has to be, because of the Fetty Bros' involvement in Arizona, were these three members of the Aryan family that was indicted actual members of the Aryan family, or were they associates of the Aryan family who had just picked up with them to be involved in that new trafficking organization that the Fetty Bros left for them to take over? Because they are certainly from Arizona, and they were the only ones of that 28-member family that were taken down that were from Arizona. Now, it's going to be very important to note this right here. On November the 7th, 2022, Washington Fetty Bros get decades in prison. Just 6 days prior to the atrocities on King Road on November the 13th, 2022. So just to reiterate, they get decades in prison because of a confidential informant that single-handedly has put them there. They've already shown what they're capable of when they even think that somebody is informing on them. When they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that somebody informed on them, they not only informed on them, but has sent them to prison for decades. I think the November 7th and November timelines start to really mean something in this case. Now, the motive is clear. Well, I think that motive is plain as day. And when we get into the next two videos, plain as day will become beyond a shadow of a doubt, I assure you. So please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, of course. I want your comments. I want your thoughts. Give me all those criticisms. Folks, until next time, Pavarotti's out.